The children I babysit have a safety code word for danger, and they used it when their grandfather appeared at the house. I had been caring for the Whitmore kids for about 4 months when I first learned about the code word. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was helping 6-year-old Lily with her homework while her older brother, Owen, played video games in the living room. Their mother, Natalie, had recently started a new position at the hospital and needed someone dependable 3 days a week after school until she returned home around 7 p.m. The pay was fair and the kids were kind, so it seemed like a straightforward job. That afternoon, Lily looked up from her math worksheet and asked if I knew their special word. I told her I didn't, and she glanced at Owen. He paused his game and walked over. At 9 years old, he took his responsibility as a big brother seriously and was always protective of Lily. Owen explained that their mom had taught them a code word to use if they ever felt unsafe or needed help but couldn't say it directly. The word was lighthouse. If either of them used lighthouse in a sentence, it meant something was wrong and I needed to pay close attention. I asked why they needed a code word. Owen's expression became serious in a way that felt older than his years. He said their grandfather was no longer allowed to see them, and if he ever came to the house, they were supposed to use the word. Lily added that Grandpa used to be kind, but later became mean and frightened their mom. She said, "Sometimes people's brains get sick, and they don't act like themselves anymore." It was clear Natalie had carefully explained the situation in a way they could understand without overwhelming them. I told them I understood and would remember the word. I also asked what their grandfather looked like so I could recognize him if necessary. Owen used their mom's emergency phone to show me a photo from 2 years ago. The picture showed a tall man with gray hair and a thick beard, smiling with his arms around both children. He looked like any other grandfather, which made the situation more unsettling. Although the conversation stayed with me, I didn't dwell on it. Natalie appeared stressed when she hired me, but I assumed it was the typical pressure of being a single parent with a demanding job. During the interview, she mentioned that the children's father was not involved and that her own parents were unavailable to help. I later understood that the situation was more complex than simple scheduling conflicts. In the weeks that followed, I noticed certain precautions. Natalie always texted me exactly 5 minutes before arriving home. Cameras were installed at every entrance, and she monitored them frequently from her phone. The children knew never to open the door for anyone, even familiar faces, unless their mom had specifically approved it. One evening, I casually mentioned that an older man had waved at us from across the street while we were collecting the mail. Natalie's face lost color as she asked me to describe him in detail. Only after confirming it was a neighbor did she relax. The afternoon everything escalated began like any other. I arrived at 3:30 p.m., let myself in with the key Natalie provided, and waited for the kids to return from school. About 15 minutes later, Owen and Lily came in, dropped their backpacks in the hallway, and immediately began debating whose turn it was to choose the snack. I was settling their disagreement over apple slices versus crackers when someone knocked on the front door. Both children froze and exchanged alarmed looks. I checked the camera feed on the tablet by the door and saw an older man standing on the porch holding a grocery bag. His gray hair and beard were thinner than in the photo, but it was clearly the same person. I realized this was their grandfather. Owen took Lily's hand and guided her toward the kitchen while I considered my next step. The man knocked again, more firmly, and called out that he knew the kids were home because he had seen them arrive. I instructed the children to go upstairs to Owen's room and closed the door while I addressed the situation. Lily began crying, and Owen put his arm around her shoulders as they moved toward the stairs. At the top of the staircase, Owen turned and said clearly, "I hope the lighthouse is still standing after that storm last week." My heart raced because I understood the signal. I immediately texted Natalie that her father was at the door, then dialed 911 and kept my finger ready on the call button. The man knocked again and said he only wanted to see his grandchildren briefly. He claimed Natalie was overreacting and separating them without reason. His voice sounded calm and polite, which made the situation feel confusing. It was difficult to reconcile his tone with the seriousness of the warning the children had given me. I approached the door without opening it and told him Natalie was not home and he needed to leave. He asked who I was, and I explained that I was the babysitter. After a pause, he responded that this was ideal and suggested I seemed responsible enough to understand that grandparents have rights. He said his daughter was going through personal difficulties and had misunderstood certain events. According to him, the legal issues were based on confusion and he had been cleared of wrongdoing. His explanation was composed and persuasive. For a brief moment, I questioned the situation. Then I remembered Lily's quiet statement about him frightening her mother. That memory clarified my decision. I told him again to leave and that I would contact the police if he refused. He laughed as if I were exaggerating and said he only wanted to drop off gifts for the children. He asked if I could at least take the bag. I declined and held up my phone so he could see I was prepared to call authorities. His demeanor changed immediately. He began striking the door with his fist and shouting that they were his grandchildren and no one could prevent them from seeing them. He accused Natalie of misleading the children and said he would make the truth known. I could hear Lily crying upstairs. With shaking hands, I completed the 911 call. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation while the man continued pounding and yelling. She confirmed that officers were on their way and instructed me to remain inside with all doors locked and avoid further interaction. She asked about a protective order, and since I did not know the details, I texted Natalie again. She replied at once, confirming there was a restraining order prohibiting him from being within 500 feet of the house or the children. She said she was leaving work immediately and would arrive in about 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt significantly longer. The pounding stopped, and silence followed. I checked the camera and saw him walking to an old blue sedan parked across the street. At first, I thought he was leaving. Instead, he opened the trunk and removed a metal baseball bat. I felt a wave of fear as I watched him return toward the house, swinging it casually. He called out that if I refused to cooperate, he would find another way inside. He moved toward the backyard, disappearing from the camera's view. I ran upstairs to Owen's room, where both children were sitting closely together on the bed. Owen was reassuring Lily quietly. I told them the police were on their way and their mom was coming home. We needed to stay upstairs and remain silent. Moments later, I heard glass shatter downstairs. He had broken the sliding kitchen door. I directed the children into Owen's closet and instructed them to stay there regardless of what they heard. Then I picked up Owen's wooden baseball bat from beside his bed and positioned myself between the closet and the bedroom door. I could hear heavy footsteps below and the man calling Owen and Lily's names in a tone that sounded falsely cheerful. He said he had brought presents and asked if they wanted to see what he bought. Soon his footsteps began ascending the stairs, one step at a time. Each creak of the wood intensified the tension. Lily was crying softly in the closet, and Owen was trying to calm her as the footsteps came closer.
The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I held my breath and tightened my grip on the bat. Then his voice came from just outside the door. He said he knew they were inside and that they needed to stop playing games. The doorknob began to turn. I lifted the bat over my head, prepared to swing at whoever entered. The door opened slowly, and I saw his face, angry and focused, nothing like the smiling grandfather in the photo. When he saw me holding the bat, he laughed and said I was just a kid myself and should put it down before someone got hurt. He stepped into the room. I swung the bat as hard as I could, aiming for his shoulder rather than his head. It struck with a solid impact, and he stumbled backward, dropping his own bat onto the floor. He grabbed his shoulder, swore, and lunged toward me. I swung again, but missed. He caught the bat and pulled it from my hands with more force than I expected. Now we were both inside the room. He stood between me and the door, holding both bats. He said I had made a serious mistake and that he was not leaving without his grandchildren. At that moment, I heard sirens approaching. His expression shifted from anger to concern. He glanced toward the window and then at the closet where the children were hiding. The sirens grew louder, and I heard car doors slam outside. He swore again, threw the bats to the floor, and ran out of the room and down the stairs. I heard him moving quickly through the house, and then the back door closing. I immediately went to the closet and opened it. The children were holding each other tightly and shaking. I told them it was safe and that the police had arrived, but Owen did not release Lily. Officers entered through the front door, announcing themselves. I called down that we were upstairs and unharmed. 2 officers came up with their weapons drawn, checking each room before lowering them. A female officer knelt in front of the children and introduced herself as Officer Williams. She asked if they were injured. Lily shook her head but continued crying. Owen looked at the floor and held his sister closer. Officer Williams informed us that they had caught the man attempting to climb the back fence and that he was now in custody. She asked me to describe exactly what had happened. I explained everything from the first knock to him breaking in with the bat as a self-defense. Another officer documented the damaged sliding door and photographed the scene. Additional officers arrived and secured the property. About 10 minutes later, Natalie rushed through the front door. She appeared distressed and moved past the officers until she reached us upstairs. She knelt down, held both children tightly, and checked them for injuries. They were not physically harmed, but they were clearly shaken, clinging to her and avoiding the doorway. Natalie thanked me repeatedly for keeping them safe. An ambulance arrived as a precaution, and paramedics examined everyone while police continued their work. About an hour later, Detective Laura Sullivan arrived. She was in her 40s, observant, and had been assigned to the family's case months earlier. Detective Sullivan spoke with Natalie in the living room, while a victim advocate stayed upstairs with the children. I overheard Natalie explaining that her father had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia 2 years earlier, and that his personality had changed significantly. He had become paranoid and aggressive, particularly toward her after her divorce. 8 months earlier, he had shoved her hard enough to break her wrist. On another occasion, he had grabbed Owen forcefully enough to leave bruises. The restraining order had been active for 6 months, and until that day, he had not violated it. Natalie admitted she believed he might have accepted the limits, but now understood that assumption was incorrect. Detective Sullivan explained that violating the restraining order, breaking and entering, and assaulting me would result in jail time rather than a warning. She asked if I would provide a formal statement. I agreed, even though I was still shaken. That evening, after the police left and the children were in bed, Natalie sat with me at the kitchen table and apologized for the risk I had faced. She said she should have been clearer about the level of threat when hiring me. I assured her it was not her fault and that I was grateful to have been there for the children. She insisted on paying me triple for the day and said she would understand if I chose not to return. I was frightened, and the thought of being alone in the house again made me uneasy. However, I thought about Owen using the code word at the right moment, and Lily trying to stay brave despite her fear. I told Natalie I would continue babysitting, but I wanted a full review of all security measures and clear instructions on how to respond if something similar happened again. We stayed up past midnight reviewing emergency procedures, contact numbers, camera locations, and alarm systems. She showed me the panic button application on her phone that connected directly to police dispatch. The next morning, I went to the police station to give my formal statement to Detective Sullivan. She recorded my account as I described every detail I could recall. She showed me photos of the arrest, his shirt torn, his face tense as officers handcuffed him. She explained that he would be held without bail for violating a protective order and that the judge considered him a flight risk. There would be a hearing the next week, and I would need to testify. The idea of speaking in court in front of him made me anxious, but Detective Sullivan said my testimony would be important in ensuring accountability. She also informed me that before his dementia diagnosis, he had been arrested twice for assault, once involving Natalie's mother before she passed, and once involving a neighbor. The illness had reduced whatever impulse control he previously had. In the weeks that followed, I experienced nightmares. I would wake up imagining him standing in the doorway or worrying that I had failed to secure the closet. My roommate noticed I was tense and struggling to sleep and encouraged me to visit the university counseling center. The therapist explained that trauma symptoms were common after such an experience. She taught me breathing exercises and grounding strategies to manage anxiety. She also reminded me that I was not obligated to continue babysitting if I felt unsafe. Still, each time I considered quitting, I remembered Lily asking if I would come back the next week because she didn't want a new babysitter who didn't understand the lighthouse. The code word had worked as intended, and that mattered. The preliminary hearing took place on a Friday morning, and I missed classes to attend. The courthouse felt formal and imposing, with high ceilings and marble floors. Natalie met me outside the courtroom. She looked exhausted, with visible dark circles under her eyes. She told me the children were staying with her best friend because she didn't want them near the building. Inside, I saw her father for the first time since the incident. He wore an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, appearing smaller and older than before. His attorney, a public defender, seemed tired and distracted. The prosecutor, Diana Foster, had already reviewed my testimony with me in advance. When called to the witness stand, I placed my hand on a Bible and swore to tell the truth. My voice trembled as I described the events from the first knock to me using the bat in self-defense. The defense attorney questioned whether I had personally witnessed prior harm or was relying only on what the children had said. I responded that I saw him break into the house with a weapon and pursue me upstairs, which was sufficient evidence of danger. The judge, an older man with gray hair, listened carefully and took notes throughout. After both sides presented their arguments, he ruled that there was probable cause for all charges and that the defendant would remain in custody until trial. Bail was set for $500,000, an amount beyond what his Social Security income could realistically cover.
Natalie cried with relief when the judge delivered the decision. Outside the courtroom, prosecutor Diana Foster explained that the trial would not begin for several months because the court schedule was full. Until then, the restraining order would stay in place and would be extended to include me, since I had been directly threatened. She advised me to document anything unusual, unknown vehicles near my apartment or campus, any sense of being followed or suspicious behavior. Because of his dementia, he was considered unpredictable. If he somehow posted bail, they could not guarantee what he might do. That possibility unsettled me more than I admitted. I returned to babysitting the following Wednesday. The children were not the same as before. Owen had become quieter and remained close to me throughout the house. According to Natalie, Lily had started wetting the bed again, something she had not done since she was 4. Both children reacted strongly to sudden noises and avoided the sliding door, which had been replaced with reinforced glass. Natalie installed an alarm system that signaled whenever a door or window opened. The added security made the house feel heavily monitored. The children began seeing a therapist twice a week who specialized in childhood trauma. Gradually, they started to regain some normalcy. Owen laughed at jokes again. Lily stopped asking repeatedly whether her grandfather could leave jail. Still, it was clear something fundamental had shifted. They had learned at a young age that someone who was supposed to love you could also cause harm. 3 months later, the trial date was confirmed. By then, I had become closely connected to the Whitmore family. I was now there 4 days a week because Natalie had received a promotion and required additional help.
I attended Owen's school concert and Lily's soccer matches. I assisted with homework, prepared meals, and read bedtime stories. Natalie told me I was more than a babysitter. I was someone her children trusted deeply, and that trust was especially meaningful after what they had experienced. The night before I was scheduled to testify, I struggled to sleep. I rehearsed the responses Diana Foster had prepared me for and worried about missing key details. My roommate brought me chamomile tea and stayed with me until I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. The trial lasted 4 days. I testified on the second day. Diana guided me through each event carefully. The defense attorney attempted to suggest that I had overreacted, that an elderly man with dementia did not pose a serious threat, and that I had escalated the situation by using a bat. Diana objected multiple times, and the judge upheld most of her objections. When I stepped down from the stand, my legs were unsteady. Natalie testified next. She described years of escalating aggression and controlling behavior from her father. She spoke about her broken wrist, the bruises on Owen, and the constant fear she had lived with. Owen's pediatrician confirmed the injuries he had documented. Detective Sullivan presented collected evidence, including a neighbor's security footage that showed the man approaching the house carrying the bat. The defense argued diminished capacity due to dementia. However, the prosecution presented proof that he had planned the visit in advance, demonstrating awareness of his actions. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all charges: breaking and entering, violating a restraining order, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted kidnapping. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Natalie broke down in tears upon hearing the verdicts, and I stayed beside her. Outside the courthouse, Diana explained that given his prior record and the seriousness of the offenses, he was likely facing 8 to 12 years in prison. Considering his age and medical condition, it was possible he might never be released. Although the outcome increased our sense of safety, it did not feel like a victory. Owen and Lily had effectively lost their grandfather, not through death, but through illness that had changed him into someone unsafe. Natalie had already mourned the father she once knew, and now had to see him incarcerated. There were no true winners, only consequences. Sentencing took place in late October. The courtroom was filled with individuals I did not recognize, including advocates for dementia patients and prison reform, who argued that incarcerating someone with a degenerative brain condition was inhumane. The judge listened to their statements and then asked if anyone wished to speak on behalf of the victims. Natalie approached the microphone holding prepared remarks. She spoke of loving her father and grieving the man she once was. She also described the fear of living under constant threat. She discussed Lily's nightmares, Owen's anxiety, and her own difficulty trusting others. She said she wanted her father to receive medical treatment, but also needed her children to be protected. She acknowledged that balancing those realities was deeply painful. The judge thanked her for her statement and sentenced her father to 10 years in a correctional facility equipped with a specialized dementia care unit. He would be eligible for compassionate release if his condition declined to the point that he no longer posed a risk, but that decision would be made by a review board rather than granted automatically. After sentencing, life gradually stabilized. The alarm system became routine background noise. The children stopped checking rooms before entering. Natalie began sleeping through the night instead of waking at every sound. I continued babysitting and witnessed the children's growth and recovery. Owen resumed playing baseball and showed real skill. Lily joined a drama club and discovered she enjoyed performing. Although the code word lighthouse would likely never be needed again, they both remembered it. Some lessons remain long after the danger passes. One evening after the children were asleep, Natalie told me she still felt conflicted. She loved her father and struggled seeing him decline in prison, yet she knew she had made the only choice that ensured her children's safety. Sometimes, she said, the choices are not good or bad, only less harmful. A year after the trial, I graduated and moved across the country for work. Saying goodbye to Owen and Lily was more difficult than I anticipated. They had taught me about resilience and courage in ways I would always remember. Natalie gave me a photo of the three of us at Lily's 7th birthday party, all smiling without concern. On the back, she had written, "Thank you for being our lighthouse." I became emotional during the flight, not purely out of sadness, but because certain experiences permanently reshape you. I learned that danger does not always appear obvious, that love and fear can coexist in one relationship, that protecting someone might require testifying against a member of their family. These were not lessons I expected to learn at 22, but they strengthened my awareness and resolve. This was just one of many extraordinary experiences.